can be thought of in the thought space, and it's like, it's how do you take something as complex as an organism, Kyle, right? Or Jim,
Mm.
Yeah.
and reflect it in thought, and try to like attend to all that it is. It's very difficult, and I think Hegel is really, he's really trying to show you the two sides of what the universal organism is here.
There's
Yeah,
all
that's what
parts
he.
and wholes.
Good.
Relationship between the parts and the whole. The
Yeah.
part you can't you can't take a reductionist view in which you reduce the whole to its components, because the properties of the components are in large degree dependent on the relationship of those components to the whole.
Yeah.
And that's really an idea really goes back to Aristotle.
All right, so we'll just go on.
Yeah.
What is lacking in this display of organic being or immediate organic being as such is that the notion here is still immediate, is only as internal end in the element of indifference, but that its moments are physical realities which are not reflected into themselves, do not form a one confronting that indifference. But the universal, the end, expands into these moments and returns into itself. Their indifference is the one-sided moment which gathers itself together into negativity and is an individual. The substance divides itself not only into different sides, but into absolute opposites, such that each of them is the totality, is a being reflected into itself, indifferent to the other. A one by its very nature, and not
Oh.
only by its own nature, since the division is into sides whose very reality, in this oneness, this negativity, whose existence is the process contained in it.
That's the syllogism we're about to go through.
Yeah. Yep. So life, therefore, is essentially this perfect fluid pervasion of all its parts, i.e., of parts indifferent to the whole. They are not chemical abstractions, but have a substantial whole life of their own, a life of the parts, which, inwardly restless, resolves itself and brings forth only the whole. The whole is the universal substance, the ground as well as the resultant totality, and it is this totality as an actuality. It is the one which contains, bound within itself, the parts in their freedom. It sunders itself into them, endows them with its universal life, and as their negative, holds them within itself as the power over them. This is posited in the form of an independent circulation in and through the parts, but this movement is at the same time the sublation of their particularity and the becoming of the universal. This is the universal circle of movement in the individual actual, a circle which, more accurately, is the totality of three circles, the unity of universality and actuality. Oh, the two circles of their opposition and the circle of their reflection into itself. So he's describing the syllogism here of what that looks like, basically bringing two
Well,
extreme
look at
moments uh,
Boston's photo.
into a unity that reflects itself into itself, I think. To this day, the statement reflect into itself is still a bit of a one of those concepts I stumble over still to this day is
Yeah,
the reflection into self.
that's. I always think back to the master and slave dialectic because it's one identifying oneself through another.
Hmm.
That's currently my mind model for how that works, or to help kind of think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Kyle, you want to read the first?
Yeah. Yep. First, the organic being is the actual which sustains itself in its own self, runs through its process. It is its own universal, and sunders into its parts, which sublate themselves into the production of the whole. So this is the individual. The genus here stands on the side of the organic being. The conclusion of the syllogism is that the genus is directly united with its non-organic nature. The organic being sunders itself, therefore, into two universal extremes, the non-organic nature and the genus, of which it is the middle term, universal, individual, particular, and with each of which it is immediately one, being itself genus and non-organic nature. Thus, the individual still has its non-organic nature within it, and feeds on itself in that it consumes itself as its own inorganicity. But in doing so, it develops members within itself, i.e., it sunders its universality into its differences. The course of the process within the individual itself as a diremption, which does not exclude the differences, and as a relation of the organic being to itself. The universal has to actualize itself in its own self, and it's precisely through this movement in which it becomes for itself that it gives itself its self-feeling. The organic being is turned against itself as its immediate universal, as this organic genus. It is in this process of individualization. It opposes itself to itself internally, as later it will oppose the external world. But as of yet, the other is still held in check by the notion. However, insofar as the individual is already presupposed, he unites here the genus, which is its universality, with the particularized universal. The latter is one of the extremes, that which, taken up into the absolute genus, becomes absolute particularity and singularity. This is its particular delivering, the becoming, the moment of individuality. Yeah, I don't think I have the ability to do that yet. Okay. And you're not on that. Which enters the process as already in being. Nothing comes out of the process but what is already there. It is the process of the digestion of itself and the development of the moments as members, the shaping of them. The members are no less generated than consumed, and in this general unrest, what abides as simple as the soul. In this process, the individual succeeds through the genus in breaking loose from the latter. It is in the process in the genus which makes the genus into a one, which is charged with negativity, and so is opposed to the genus as to the universal. I think the first thing I was getting out of that, this is kind of the shape of the being itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Organism is self-enclosed, self-digesting, developing its members internally. The genus is still on the side of organic being, not yet confronting it externally. Yeah. This is the first figure of the syllogism, right?
Yeah.
Which is why we start here.
Yes.
It's the most commonsensical starting point. So it's one side is the genus, the other side is the genus process.
Yep. Secondly, the universal is a real existence, uh, Dasein and Des, and the organic one is the power over this negative of itself, this external being, and consumes it so that it exists only as sublated. The organic being is immediately unity of individuality and universality, organic genus. It is an exclusive one and excludes the universal from itself. The genus as abandoned by the power of negativity by life. In other words, the organic posits for itself its non-organic nature. The genus is the absolute universal which posits the abstract universal as its opposite, but in doing so, it has also liberated the moment of singularity, which is the negative relationship to this non-organic nature. Whereas previously the individual was the middle term and the sides the universal extremes, now it is the genus, which is the middle term. Here, therefore, it is through the genus that the organic being is mediated with its non-organic nature, P-U-I, particular universal individual. The former is the power over the latter because it is the absolute universal. This is the process of nutrition. The non-organic nature is the universality as the non-actual genus, which is subject partly to individuality as such, to the earth, and partly to the singularity which frees itself from it. This universality is mere passivity, but in its actuality as it is in its own self, the universality is the sunderance of organic nature and its non-organic nature. The former being the form of individuality, and the latter the form of universality. Both are abstractions. The substance is the same in both forms into which it has differentiated itself. So, and now we have A and B sections. It says, the determinateness remains a universality. It is one with the element and principle. For the organic being, there is nothing which it is not itself. And B, it says, that immediate being of the organism as genus is equally the outcome of sheer mediation through the non-organic world. It exists only through this otherness, this antithesis to itself as abstract universality. It is the genus which has been released from the individuality. But because that abstract universality is in its own self also life, it makes the transition through its own self to organic being in the generatio equivoca. In general, the existence of organic being is the act of the whole earth, in which it individualizes and contracts itself, the reflection into self of the universal. But equally becomes a stabilized reflectedness into itself, and the higher plants and animals are this established reflectedness into self, which does not shoot up out of the earth like fungi, like unindividualized jelly or lichens, which are only organic life in general, with but a meager internal organization. But the abstract universality in its real existence only reaches as far as a general reflection and begins here its immediate becoming. This life, which is a reflectedness into self, is now established as an independent existence passing through its own cyclic process, and it has its own existence which remains opposed to that other reality and holds fast to its negative nature, denies its origin, and displays its own becoming. So basically, we see here in B, organic nature being self-sustaining in its general universal environment.
Yeah. Also, just realizing, the initial first one was being kind of sort of its immediacy, and now it's sort of going through its essence, the reflection. And this is probably why we see A and a B there, because it's both sides of that reflection.
Yeah.
It's all self-similar. Yet again.
Go ahead with thirdly.
Okay. Thirdly, this actual being thus brought forth is the genus, the power over the individual and the process of that power. It sublates this individual, bringing forth another which is the actuality of the genus. But just for that reason, it's also tearing itself apart from the non-organic nature to which the genus relapses. The organic being, which is thus mediated through the non-organic nature with the genus, IPU, is the sex relation. The conclusion of syllogism is the connection of the two sides, which are the whole organic being, or the diremption of this whole into opposed self-subsistent sexes. The sublation of the individual and the resultant being of the genus, but of the genus as an individual actual being which initiates the cycle again. The result is, therefore, that the individual has separated itself off from the genus. The self-subsistent individual is therefore related to a being to which, as genus, it is indifferent. The genus has sundered itself into self-subsistent beings, each of which, as this whole, is object to itself, but outside of itself. In the first process, we have being for self. In the second, the representation and knowledge of another. In the third, the unity of both, and the other and itself concept. It is the true actualization of the notion, the complete self-subsistence of both, in which each also knows itself in the other and its own self, It is a relation which has become purely ideal, so that each is ideal to itself, is in itself a universal. The pure non-objectivity is met up in the self as such.
Yeah. The true actualization of the notion, the complete self-subsistence of both, in which each also knows itself in the other as its own self. Relation which has become purely ideal, so that each is ideal to itself, is in itself a universal. The pure non-objectivity is set up in the self as such. Yeah. Oh, did you read it to the end?
Oh, I can go ahead. The organic being begins with singularity and rises to the genus, but just as immediately it discourses the reverse. The simple genus descends to singularity, for the consumption of individuals in the genus resulting from their sublation is no less the becoming of the immediate singularity of the child. The other, to the universal life of the earth, is just a truly organic form of life which continues itself in its genus. This is, in the first instance, the vegetable world, the first stage of being for self, of reflection into self, but only immediate, formal being for self. Not yet the genuine infinity. The plant discharges its moments from itself as free members and is only the subjective point of life. Plant life, therefore, begins with the vital principle, gathers itself into a point, and this point sustains and produces itself, repels itself, and produces new points. Yeah, I guess early in the point, this is the because bacteria and such really didn't have its own conception back then.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, it's all a matter of the details, but I mean, like the general,
yeah, I think bacteria and stuff would even fit here in plants in that way.
yeah. The the idea that you make the crossover from non-organic nature to organic nature through, in part through nutrition, but also what makes you up. Like there are parts of us that we look on almost as non-organic parts that used to be self-subsisting. Like take your lungs or your kidneys, right? If you take them out of your body, they're going to die. But if you look back in the long primordial history, you'll find that every one of our organs had its own separate individual self-subsistent past or analog, right? Um, like I know that sounds kind of gross, but like I've read somewhere that if you look at deep sea plants and animals, some of them resemble some of our organs and their function, but they're self-subsistent plants or animals, right? So, like that appearance, at least for me, sort of confirms what Hegel is trying to say here in terms of the crossover from non-organic to organic life, um, and sort of how that works. Produces new points. It's interesting. Okay, cool. So we're on to the plant nature. So, the subjectivity in virtue of which organic being exists as a singular unfolds itself into an objective organism in the shape of a body articulated into parts which are separate and distinct. In the plant, which is only the first immediate stage of subjective vitality, the objective organism and its subjectivity are still immediately identical. So let's say that again. In the plant, which is only the first immediate stage, the objective organism and its subjectivity are still immediately identical. Consequently, the process whereby the plant differentiates itself into distinct parts and sustains itself is one in which it comes forth from itself and falls apart into a number of individuals. the whole plant being rather the basis for these individuals than a subjective unity of members. The part, bud, branch, and so on, is also the whole plant. A further consequence is that the difference of the organic parts is only a superficial metamorphosis, and one part can easily assume the function of the other. So like if you read sci-fi, you read, or watch horror films, you read about people who lose a limb and they can grow it back. This is something that plants can do quite immediately. And I've read that there are science experiments in which and even like you cut off a lizard's tail, it will grow back, right? So this doesn't just um this phenomenon, for example, doesn't just exist in the plant kingdom, but can in the animal as well. And so what it leads me to believe is that you could do it anywhere, but you have to have the right circumstances and stimulant, I guess, to do it. And the more complex an organism it is, the more complex a process to make it happen in the first place. With a plant that's relatively simple, I mean, it's second nature. You cut off a branch and the branch eventually grows back or grows around the stump of the branch and so on and so forth, right? Even cutting down a tree, um, like stuff stuff can still grow off of it if it's properly watered and nutrients and the whole bit.
You got your cookies?
The
Yes.
the line between a field and trees and plants, uh, the line between death and life is very thin. You cut down a tree and a whole bunch of stuff is going to grow, fungi as well as bacteria as well as, new roots are going to grow around it almost immediately, given it enough time. Same could be said of us. We die and we go back to the ground and things grow off of us and eventually, sprout new life or feed current animal life, so on and so forth. Sorry if I'm putting anyone off their food with with that. So, can you read the Zuzats, Kyle? Take your time. Take your time.
Allergies, man. Whereas the geological organism is the mere system of shape devoid of ideality, within the subjectivity of plant life, ideality now enters in. But as the ideality present in all its members, life is essentially a living being. And this is merely excited by the outer world. Here, therefore, the causal relation falls away, and generally in the sphere of life, all the categories of the understanding cease to be valid. If, however, these categories are still to be employed, then their nature must be transformed, and then it can be said that life is its own cause. The proposition can be advanced that everything lives in nature. This is sublime and is supposed to be speculative, but the notion of life, i.e., life in itself, which of course is found everywhere, is one thing. Real life, the subjectivity of the living organism in which parts existed as vivified, in another. Thus, the geological organism is alive, not in its separate parts, but only as a whole. It is only potentially alive, not in present existence. But the living organism differentiates itself into a subjective and a dead being. On the one hand, in its woody structure, in its bones, it makes itself the presupposition of its frame. In the individual, as in the case of the geological organism as a whole. But on the other hand, the living organism is a shape which is inhabited by the substantial form. This is determinative not only in respect of the spatial relationships of the separate parts, but is equally the unrest of the process in which the form determines the physical properties out of itself, so that from the process it may produce shape. The plant, as first self-subsistent subject that still has its origin in immediacy, is, however, the feeble infantile life that has not yet developed within itself the moment of difference. Like every living organism, the nature of a plant is particularized. Whereas in the animal, the particularity is at the same time a particularity in contrast with which with the subjectivity as soul is also universal. In the plant, the particularity is quite immediately identical to the plant's vitality in general. It does not exist as a state distinct from the plant's inner life. On the contrary, the quality of the plant completely pervades its general vegetative nature, instead of being distinct from it as in the animal. In the plant, therefore, the members are particular only in relation to each other, not to the whole. The members themselves are in turn wholes, as in the dead organism, where in sedimentary strata there are external to each other. Although the plant posits itself as the other of itself in order perpetually to idealize this contradiction, the differentiation is only formal. What it posits as the other is not vertible other, but the same individual as the subject. And
I
then
feel
references Goethe here. Okay.
I
Girth again.
yes,
Uh,
sometimes I feel like he's codifying this for the censors because you read certain passages and like once you get a feel for this, you realize it's code for um describing life in a particular way that if it was plain spoken, the church would have a problem with it. You know what I mean? And so how do you differentiate plant and animal life in a scientific context without um offending anybody, you know? And I've read Hegel say multiple times in less formal settings that, you know, when he puts this in front of students in his high school classes or his professorial classes, it's always a supplement to his actual lectures, which are quite a bit more explicit, so that when the censors aren't looking, he can tell them, well, this is what I really meant by this. Uh, you know, and to those who can only read it, as us now, good luck finding the codex. Um, yeah,
let's say he does.
crazy.
It says here, is it Goethe?
Goethe, yeah,
Yeah. The more imperfect
Goethe.
the more imperfect a creature is, the more do the parts resemble each other. And the more are they like the whole. The more perfect a creature is, the more dissimilar its parts become. In the first place, the whole is more or less like the parts. In the second, the whole is dissimilar to the parts. The more the parts resemble each other, the less they are subordinated to each other. Subordination of the parts betokens a more perfect creature.
Yeah, Goethe is basically saying there, if you're an organic animal that has multiple organs, you're closer to perfection. The more your organs or parts of you are similar to the other organs, the closer you are to a plant, basically.
Yeah,
Which
it's
which
kind
is
of yeah. Go ahead.
yeah
Saying the
yeah
more
which
mm.
sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking like the more deterministic different parts of the animal are, the more complex it is. And the more complex it is, the more perfect it is in that way. That's what I kind of get out of that. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, you're fine. You pretty much said it.
Okay. You got the same thing. Good.
Yeah.
In plant life, therefore, growth is predominantly an increase of the plant itself, as an alteration of form, whereas animal growth is only an alteration of size, but at the same time remains one shape, because the totality of the members is taken up into the subjectivity. The growth of the plant is an assimilation into itself of the other, but as a simple multiplication, and this assimilation is also going forth from self. This is kind of, I guess, the fractalness of plants. It is not a coming to see as an individual, but multiplication of the individuality. So that the one individuality is only the superficial unity of the many. The individuals remain a separated plurality, indifferent to each other, which do not proceed from their substance as from a common essence. Sharp therefore says, I've the growth of plants is a perpetual addition of new parts which did not exist previously. Bound up with the homogeneity of the parts of the plant, therefore, is their falling asunder, because they are not related to each other as an inner qualitative difference. In other words, the organism has not at the same time acquired a system of viscera. It is a production of itself in externality, but all the same, a growth altogether from within outwards, not a sort of external accretion as in crystallization. Yeah, I think it's so simple in the way it branches off itself.
Yeah.
We do still have that kind of fractality in ourselves. It's even more simple in plants. So like you
Yep.
can think like broccoli or like a tree branch or everything. If you check, it's just fractal,
Mhm.
smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something we haven't really discussed. How the concept of fractals can be related to Hegel.
Yeah, it's kind of like he didn't even have the term at the time to explain what
Yeah,
he's trying to explain.
because there are more modern concepts like fractals or systems theories that can be pretty much directly related to Hegel.
It's one of those things I like about mathematical figures like fractals, that actually, if they're programmed correctly to self-reproduce, they end up resembling organic life
Yeah,
in its development,
I mean,
both visually and orally.
and as I've already said, there's always that even exists in the entire system of the logic, right? Because it always comes back around to itself, not just in like a spiral, but like it's a. I need to learn the connection here. It's a strange attractor. Is the fractal or the chaos theory term where it's heading to? It's self-similar, but it's going on to a more and higher kind of endpoints. So I'm trying to think how to differentiate between this and a spiral. So I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah. So, I'll just read 344. The process of formation and of reproduction of the singular individual in this way coincides with the process of the genus and is a perennial production of new individuals, because the self-like universality, the subjective one of the individuality, does not separate itself from the real particularization, but is only submerged in it, so that the plant is not yet a self-subsistent subjectivity over against its implicit organism. Therefore, it can neither freely determine its place, i.e., move from the spot, unless you're an ant, nor is it for itself in face of the physical particularization and individualization of its implicit organism. Consequently, its nutrition is not an interrupted process, but a continuous flow, and it relates itself not to individualized inorganic nature, but to the universal elements. So it's always connected to that background, right? You disconnect the plant from the background of the soil, it dies. You disconnect the human from the soil, like launch it into space, and as long as it has, a food source, it can be fully detached from the soil, just as an example. Yeah, still less is it capable of animal heat and feeling, for it is not the process. Well, uh, I think I depart a little from Hegel on this, but then again, I don't think they had the tools to like figure out, how close or how far feeling goes. You know what I mean? Like people play music for their plants and so on and so forth. Um, Still less is it capable of animal feeling. Heat and feeling for it is not the process in which its members, which are rather mere parts and are themselves individuals, are brought back into a negative simple unity. Okay, so I agree with that. Plant doesn't have organs like animals do. Duh. We've already, I mean, yeah.
Get an idea down. Okay.
Yeah.
Everything organic is an immediate differentiation which preserves the manifoldness and the unity. Animal life, however, as the truth of the organic sphere, advances to a higher specific difference, such that the difference which is pervaded by the substantial form is only one side, and the other side constituted by the substantial form on its own over against the submergence in the difference. The animal consequently has sensation, but the plant has not developed to this difference within itself to the stage that is where the self-like point of unity and the organic crystal which already be the two sides of its life. Accordingly, the vital principle, which is the animal, which in the animal is soul, in the plant still submerged in the process of mutual external parts. In the animal, on the contrary, the one vital principle is doubly present. A as indwelling and vivifying, B as self-like unity which exists as simple. It is true that both moments in their relation must also be present in the plant, but one part of this difference falls outside of its existence, whereas in the animal there is present the absolute return to the living organism as self-feeling. The existent plant, on the other hand, has only one bodily organism, in which the pure self-like unity within self is not yet present as a reality, but only in the notion, because it has not yet become objective. In the plant, therefore, the body with its members is not yet the objectivity of the soul. The plant is not yet objective to itself. Therefore, for the plant, the unity is something external, just as the process of the organism of the earth falls outside of it. And this outer physical self of the plant is light toward which it arrives, or attrives, in the same way that the man seeks man. The plant has an essential infinite relationship with light, but at first it is a quest for this itself, like heavy matter. This simple principle of selfhood, which is outside the plant, is the supreme power over it. Schelling therefore says that if the plant had consciousness, it would worship light as its god. The process of self-preservation is to obtain the self, to satisfy oneself, to come to self-feeling. But because the self is outside of the plant, the latter striving after the self is rather a being drawn out of itself, so that the return to itself is a perpetual forthgoing in conversely. Thus the plant preserves itself by multiplying itself. The externality of subjective self-like unity of the plant is objective in its relation to light, in the same way that light appears externally in the jelly-like forms of the marine life, and also in the colors of birds in the tropics. So that here, even in the animal world, the power of light is visible. Man fashions the self in the more interior fashion, although in southern latitudes he too does not reach a stage where his self, his freedom, is objectively guaranteed. It is from light that plants first get their sap, and in general, a vigorous individualization. Without light, they cannot indeed grow bigger, but they remain without taste, color, and smell. They therefore turn to the light. Potato plants sprouting in a cellar creep from distances of several yards across the floor to the side where light enters through a hole in the wall, and they climb up the wall as if they knew the way in order to reach the opening where they can enjoy the light. Sunflowers and hosts of other flowers follow the motion of the sun in the sky and turn towards it. In the evening, if one enters a meadow full of flowers from the east side, only a few flowers, or perhaps none, will be seen, because they are all turned toward the sun. But looking at from the west, they all make a splendid show. In the early morning, too, when one enters meadow from the east, no flowers are seen, not until the sun shines on them do they turn towards the east. Some, says Witternow, well, do not open to the sun until noon, like few plants here, some only at night, like the magnificent torch thistle, which only blooms for a few hours. Okay. Yep, that's probably going to be tonight.
Yeah.
Now, Now, because we have said the subjective one of the plant is fused with its very quality and particularization, and consequently, the negative selfhood of the plant is not yet self-related. Therefore, this self too does not yet exist as a purely non-sensuous being, the nature of which is simply soul, but it is still sensuous. No longer is it is true as a material plurality, yet still as a sensuous unity of material parts. Now, the sensuous element which remains for the unity is space. Since the plant cannot entirely destroy the element of sense, it is not yet pure time within itself. For this reason, the plant is in a specific place which it cannot get rid of, although it unfolds itself within it. Can't move. The animal, therefore, however, as process, opposes itself to its place, gets rid of it, even though it does posit it afresh. It's all the way back to motion. Similarly, the eagle wills to move itself, the point, that is to say, it wills to change its place. In this example, it sensuous immediate existence as point, or the ego wills to distinguish itself as ideality of the one from itself as a sensuous one. In the heavenly motions, the bodies of one system have indeed a free motion, but it is not a contingent motion. Their place is not determined by them as particulars, but by the time of the system which is rooted by law in the sun. Similarly, in magnetism, the opposed qualities are the determining factors. But in the subjectivity living being, which is its own time, there is negation of place, a negation posited in an absolutely indifferent manner, or as an inner indifference. The plant, however, is not yet this mastery over the indifferent, mutually external existence of parts in space, and space is consequently still an abstract space. The movement of pistils, anthers toward each other, the oscillatory movements of conferva, etc., these are to be understood only as a simple growth without any contingent determination of place. The movement in plants is determined by light, heat, and air. Treviranus points this out, example, in Hydrogen Guranus. At the end of each stem of this plant, there's a larger leaf, elliptical and lanceolate in shape, and on each side of this and attached to the same main stem are two smaller petiolate stipules. The movements of the main stems and leaves are different from those of the stipules. The movement of the main stems and larger leaves consists in an erection in the light and in a drooping down of the dark. It occurs in the joints which join the leaf with the stem and the latter with the branch. Even reflection of sunlight from a wall 20 yards away produce a distinct erection of the leaves, and also the screening of sunlight by an opaque body by a passing cloud resulted in their drooping again. A high noon, and by focusing sunlight through a burning glass, hopefully observed a trembling movement of the main leaves and of the whole plant. Moonlight and artificial light had no influence on this movement. This, yeah, at that time, I'm sure. The second movement, which is made only by the small folies, consists in the alternate erection and drooping of each plant of these leaves which face each other on the same branch. The movement ceases only with the death of the plant. There are no external causes immediately producing this effect, but it is most marked at the time of fertilization. Travernus, however, attributes to the zoospores the comparative of arbitrary movement even after they become detached from the plants. Some of the movements of the comfort are said to be oscillatory. Their separate threads bent their free ends in a series of jerks from right to left and from left to right. Often they twisted in such a way that their free ends seemed to describe a circle. But movement of this kind is still not a voluntary movement. Yeah, that makes sense. It's still kind of reactory only, not intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should be good to finish up. Unless you want to talk about alpha.
Not yet, honey. I'm on a call.
Oh, there's a gamma, and then there's a delta.
Let's stop here
Okay.
because we're gonna have to go into the beta, and then the gamma, and then talk. Oh, and then the delta.
Yeah. I saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's read from the beta um on down through geez, it just goes on and on.
Okay.
Just see how far you get. Let's put it that way. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because there's a lot to talk about here, and he's basically mapping out the plant in the ideal, which I mean makes sense. Uh, and he cites a number of studies from various people who study um, plant structure as well as activity, both in connection with its background, the universal background, in other words, the soil, as well as it itself. You know, I can kind of feel him trying to reach for it does have movement that's independent of the soil, but you can see how minute, how small the what's the word? How small the slippage is between what the environment causes and what the plants do themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's
And
there,
even
but it's like,
then, yeah, the sense of intentionality is very basic, if at all.
yeah, yeah. I would say it's there. It's just that,
Yeah.
it's not like they have electron microscopes to look deeper yet. Or do they? I forget. I don't think they do.
No, not electron.
No, no, not
You have
electron.
to have the concept of the electron.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, comrades, y'all have a great week, and we'll be talking about it in our DMs. Unless you guys have anything else.
Oh, I just speaking of electron, I finally figured out how you think about as a particle as a wave. It's like a standing wave you have in a pool is how what an electron is.
Yeah.
How a lot of particles are. It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. All right.
Cool. Comrades, you have a great one.
You too.
Jim, hope you feel better with
Yeah.
your eye.
Well, time will tell.
Yep.
Yep. Take
Glad
it
you're
easy.
feeling good about it.
Yeah.